Hello, welcome back to the latest You Are My Borough, the Northern Echoes Borough, helping with myself, Dom Shaw, and Scott Wilson, who was at Rockcliffe yesterday to speak to Michael Carrick, and is at the Riverside tomorrow for the visit of Bristol City as Borough look to get rolling again in the league. Just before we get started, if you are watching on YouTube, then do us a favour, just tap subscribe if you haven't already, and do leave a comment because we do read them and we enjoy reading through them. And it shapes what we discuss. So if there's anything you want us to talk about, then do let us know. If you listen on podcasts, then rate, review. That'd go down a treat as well, if you don't mind. Bristol City's got plenty to talk about. But before we get into the game, you were at the press conference yesterday. There's injuries to talk about, obviously, as there has been for the last couple of
yeah.
weeks. Anything. But Matt Crooks is clearly the big talking point this week.
Yeah.
He's closing in on a move to the MLS. He hasn't been included in Borough's squad list for the second half of the season. He's over there now, or he's certainly on his way over there. I was at the back end of the week to confirm the move. There's no indication that isn't going to happen. What are your thoughts on it, first of all?
Yeah. I mean, it's been bubbling around for a couple of days, hasn't it? But prior to that, it feels like it's kind of come as a bit of a bolt from the blue, really. I mean, from Matt Crooks' point of view, if you're offered the chance to go to America on a long-term deal, which we understand it's going to be maybe 3 years or something of that ilk, you're going to get a pretty big hike in wages, which we understand is what you're talking about. And, you know, you're in your 30s now and you get the chance to kind of spend this next section of your career in America, in Salt Lake, playing in the MLS. I can absolutely see why that appeals to Matt Crooks. Now, from Borough's point of view, if you've got a player coming to you saying, look, I want this. This is a deal that works for me. It works for my family. I feel at this stage of my career, I can't say no to it. Then straight away, you're on the back foot as Borough, aren't you? I think, you know, it's very easy, I think, for us and for fans to say, well, he's contracted. You just put your foot down. You make him stay, whatever. I think that puts Borough on the back foot from the word go. So I think it's then, okay, what are our long-term plans for Matt Crooks? He's in his 30s. He's got 18 months left on his current deal. So really, if you weren't going to tie him down to a longer-term deal in the summer, then you almost certainly want to sell then to get some value for him. Would you offer Matt Crooks a new deal anyway? I think that's probably a debatable point. He's been a valuable player at times. There's no doubt about that. But you probably wouldn't have him as one of your 5 or 6 absolute must-keeps within this Borough squad. So I think it then comes to, well, can you get the deal? You know, from what we've been told, Borough are getting a reasonable fee for him. You know, now what does that come to? I've got to hold my hands up. I don't exactly know. 3-4 million, somewhere like that, maybe. And I think if you're talking that kind of money for a player who, as I say, is in his 30s and you're almost certainly going to have to sell anyway, you're probably going to struggle to get that from him from an English club. So I think it probably makes sense, with the caveat that it's another forward player leaving, obviously, off the back of Morgan Rogers and off the back of a January window where Borough haven't brought a natural centre forward in. So it undoubtedly weakens Michael Carrick's options in an area of the pitch where his options were already fairly light. So I definitely think that's a fair point. But I also think it's a deal that Borough probably had to make.
Yeah, the interest isn't new. From what I gather, the interest from Salt Lake as they've certainly been interested for a couple of weeks now. Whether Crooks has known about it for that long, obviously, is I don't know. But from his point of view, as you say, you can completely understand it because he's going to be 31 by the time his contract expires. Now, from Crooks's perspective, if Borough weren't going to offer him a new contract and they were going to look to sell in the summer, would this offer still be on the table in the summer? When he's 31, would he get the offer of a 3-year deal, say, in the States? From Crooks's point of view, it might well have felt like, you know, it's now or never really. The timing feels right.
Yeah.
Looking back on his time at the club, we've talked at length, haven't we, about the divided manner of Borough's recruitment while Neil Warnock and Chris Wilder were in charge. And when you look back at those windows when they were in charge, it's absolutely crystal clear who was a Warnock signing, who was a recruitment signing. Matt Crooks was right up Neil Warnock street. And yet, in terms of value for money, in terms of his contribution, if you look back at the last 5, 6, 7 seasons, I think Crooks is right up there as Borough's best signings. He didn't arrive for a massive fee. He scored 11 goals in his first season. And I'm looking at last season when, after Michael Carrick came in, he had a knack of not just scoring goals, but scoring important goals, didn't he? He scored the late winner at Norwich. He scored the late goal against Luton. He scored 2 in the win at Birmingham. He scored a goal at Bristol City when Borough came from behind there to draw, when they were faltering a little bit. And even this season, he scored at Bolton, which obviously was a massive win at the time because Borough was struggling in the league, and it kept the run going in the Carabao Cup, which led to the semi-finals. He scored at Sunderland. He scored at Port Vale there. And then clearly, when you think of Matt Crooks, the standout moment, or one of the standout moments, is his goal at Man United. He'll be fondly remembered for what he's done on the pitch, but I think as well what he's done off the pitch. It's always struck me that Crooks has kind of got it. He's bought into what it's all about. He had no prior association with the club, but he's talked about Middlesbrough being home for him and his family. It's always felt like much more than just the club he plays for, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that's undoubtedly endeared him to the supporters. You know, he has been a bit of a cult figure. I mean, we're rewriting the Wilder Says song yet again, aren't we? But I mean, you know,
Hackney's hair is a nice fit.
I saw Greenwood's teeth being bandied around as a possibility at some point. But I mean, his inclusion in there says something, doesn't it? And he's he has been a favourite of the fans. He has been a bit of a cult figure. But as you rightly say, he's also been a really influential player on the pitch. And it always feels like you're damning a player with faint praise when you say he could play anywhere. He filled so many roles. He did it, whatever was asked of him, he delivered the goods. It feels like you're almost, damning with faint praise. But I think that's right for Crooks. That was his biggest asset, the fact that, he's played as a central midfielder, he's played as a wide midfielder, he's played as a 10, he's played as a 9, he's played as a creator, he's played as someone to play off up front. And every time he did it, A, he gave his all, and B, he was generally effective. So yeah, absolutely. I think if you're looking at Borough's signings in the last, the post-Premier League era, then I think Matt Crooks would be certainly in the top 10 of the biggest successes, and in the top 10 in terms of what he's given in terms of value for money. I do think what I would love to have seen is the meeting at Real Salt Lake that ended up with, I know what we need. We need that guy from Middlesbrough. because
and the other and when Crooks goes over, because Crooks is a dry Yorkshireman, isn't he?
Yeah.
You suspect he might have been a bit taken aback.
But it's disappointing because he leaves halfway through the season and he does leave Borough a bit short. But I think that it's impossible, and I think most fans would agree to wish him anything but the best and thank him for what he's done at Borough for all of the kind of reasons we've just outlined.
And finally, he strikes me as the type who's clearly hugely important in the dressing room, or a key figure in the dressing room. He strikes me as the type who'd be the admin of the squad's WhatsApp. That's
just added Finazaz to the group.
Yeah. Maybe a farewell himself before he leaves with a tears face emoji.
Yeah.
But that's that having those figures in the dressing room is important, isn't it? He's going to be a big miss off the pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll probably touch on this in a minute, but for me, it kind of makes it probably even more important that Jonny Howson gets this extra year, because Borough are running out of those kind of figures, really. I mean, I don't know, were we talking about it, or was I talking about it with someone else? I'm not sure, but But it feels like now that Dale and Jonny Howson are kind of the only real links to that kind of almost pre-Warnock Borough. Do you know what I mean? And I think it is important to have those threads within the club, and certainly those voices within the dressing room. And yes, there are leaders within the group still, but you're right. Crooks was definitely one of those.
Let's talk about Jonny Howson then. I was at the Riverside earlier this week because he was there as part of an event looking ahead to a couple of big games for Middlesbrough women. They play Barnsley on Sunday at Stockton. That's a 2 p.m. kickoff. The tickets are available there on the gate. Borough top, Barnsley a third. Borough 3 points clear. Barnsley have 2 games in hand. That's a big game. And then they're back at the Riverside next month to play Doncaster. That's in March. If you go on the club website, all the details are there. So we spoke to Ben Fisher, a couple of the Borough women players, and also spoke to Jonny Howson, who was there. And he was inevitably asked about his contract situation, which runs at the end of the year. When I asked about it, he joked that could we not just copy and paste what he said when I've asked him this question in the last 2 years. But what he made clear, and it was the first time, and Howson is 36 in May. He has absolutely no intentions of retiring. He wants a new contract at Borough. If he didn't get one, then he'd want to go on and play elsewhere. He did go on to talk about, and this story will come out, or the interview will come out in the next couple of weeks. He's doing his coaching badges. So he does have an eye on coaching when he hangs up his boots, but that certainly won't be next season. He wants to play on. Again, copy and paste what we've said the last couple of seasons. Feels like a no-brainer, I think. To now, clearly, Howson can't be as important on the pitch as he has been for the last 5 or 6 years. I think there has to be a realization that at some stage there's succession planning, and someone comes in and he might not be able to play quite as much football as he has been, but he's still hugely important, isn't he? And it feels like, first things first, before you even get to what he's adding with his leadership and experience and all that, feels like purely on the case of what he offers on the pitch. He deserves an extension.
Well, his performance levels have not dipped this season, did they? In each of the last 2 or 3 seasons, it's always been, is this a season when it becomes clear that actually Jonny Howson can't really cut it week in, week out in the Championship anymore? Well, we're certainly not there yet. He absolutely can cut it week in, week out in the Championship. He's been really important for Borough in terms of that central midfield. Even to the point where, and we'll get to the possible team lineup for the weekend soon, but at the minute, Michael Carrick's been shuffling Hayden Hackney's position around because he doesn't want to go with Hackney and Barlasser as his 2 kind of central midfielders if it means having to leave out Jonny Howson. So, Howson is still a really important player. We know how important he is off the pitch. When you talk about cut and paste, we asked Michael Carrick about Jonny Howson, obviously, on the back of those comments, and it was very much a cut and paste job from Carrick, both in terms of just how important Howson is to everything that goes on at Borough, on and off the pitch, and also saying, look, we are talking about this. There are talks that's ongoing. Me and Jonny have a really good relationship. We know how and when it will get resolved, and kind of hinting at the fact that, this will get resolved at the back end of the season, as has been the case with Howson in the last couple of years. The one thing I thought was interesting with Carrick is did kind of ask him, look, in years gone by, the captain of a football club was seen as the kind of go-between, wasn't he? The conduit between the manager and the players. And I just kind of asked him, is that an old-fashioned way of looking at it now? Does that still happen? And he was very much, no, that is one of the big things that Jonny Howson is for me. He is my link to the players. I'll have him in my office. I'll ask him his ideas about things. I'll use him as a sounding board for things, and then he'll then pass that on to the dressing room and be the go-between. And I don't think you can undervalue the importance of that kind of relationship. And I just thought it was interesting that even in this day and age, Carrick still obviously really values Howson's input and role in that. And
Howson's a brilliant interviewer. He's thoughtful, isn't he? He thinks about every... we were stood with him for 20, 25 minutes the other day, and you're kind of sometimes conscious of the fact that, we've this is going on and on. We might need to pull the plug here, but you got the impression he'd have happily kept talking. Not Crooks, and back to Crooks. Crooks was another one, wasn't he? Who it was always kind of heartfelt. But Howson talked about his relationship with Carrick and how Carrick will give him a lot of his time and how he'll spend afternoons sat kind of picking his brains, talking about how he approached things when he was coming to the end of his career. You suspect Carrick has been the ideal coach for Howson at this stage of his career, really, with what Carrick went through as a player and achieved as a player.
And you know, we don't want to usher Jonny Howson into retirement, but it's interesting you say about the coaching badges, because of all the players in the Borough squad who you would imagine would potentially go on to become a manager if they want to be, I'd have Howson right at the top of the list because of the way that he thinks about the game, the way that he can clearly be a leader, have relationships both above and below, if you know what I mean. I think Jonny Howson will have a career in football when he does eventually retire, if he wants one, unquestionably.
And on the pitch, before we started here, we were just having a quick chinwag about what our probable lineup that will no doubt be wrong is going to be. Although I think you nailed it, didn't you, for the Sunderland game?
I did. Yes, I did. We were right for Sunderland. It feels a lot more tricky today for a number of reasons that we'll probably.
Well, I think it's probably telling. It's probably telling. The issue we had beforehand was, will it be Howson and Barlaser and Hackney in one of those forward roles again, or will McGree come back in? Will Azaz keep his place, and will it be Howson and Hackney? Now, it might be Hackney and Barlaser in the midfield tomorrow, but it always feels more likely that it's going to be Howson, and Hackney's clearly going to be in the team if he's fit, but whether he's in the midfield or in one of those more advanced roles, Howson is still one of the first names on the team sheet, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, you keep on, I mean, I guess the thing is at the minute, there is a midweek game next week, but we're not in a period where it's every midweek. So really, the last 2 years, that's been the only question mark with Jonny Howson, really. How many games can he play? 3 games a week is probably a stretch. So when there's been a midweek game involved, Howson almost, and I'd be very surprised if Howson played tomorrow, Wednesday, the following Saturday. So I think he will come out at some point. But that's only management in terms of workload. That's not any kind of a slight on what he's given the team and how important he is, because I do think he remains as important as ever to Borough.
The question that it feels like there's plenty of question marks for the team tomorrow. The ones that kind of come to mind. You were at the presser yesterday. What was your feeling on this? So will it be Glover or is Dieng ready to come back in? Will McGree? Is McGree likely to go straight back in? Is Greenwood likely to keep his place up front? Given Coburn, we talk about Coburn and the fact that Carrick admitted that he had this small procedure and he's still having to be managed. What's your feeling on those 3?
Yeah, I think the goalkeeper is a really hard one to call because we've spoken at length on previous videos about Carrick can be fairly non-committal when it comes to injuries. He was very non-committal on exactly where Dieng is at. It becomes a little bit more awkward's probably not the word, but part of the reason Carrick was being a little bit more circumspect on that, because Glover's obviously made that error against Sunderland.
Yeah.
It feels like an easier change for him to make now, but he clearly won't want to portray it as I'm changing it because Glover's dropped the clanger against Sunderland. So we've got
Dieng to come back in anyway, wouldn't he?
He would have done, yeah. And I reading between the lines, I think there's a good chance it could be Dieng tomorrow, but I wouldn't want to absolutely hang my hat on that. So, that feels like an up and down. But you're right. I think if Dieng is fit, then he'll play. The back 4, you would imagine, will be the back 4. I guess at some stage, with it being a 3-game week, we might see Mike Clark come back in. Can Luke Ayling play 3 games in a week? Potentially not. So maybe for one of the games, Vandenberg will go off the right back, maybe. And Thomas is an option there, isn't he? But I think the main things tomorrow are right. Where does Hayden Hackney play? Is he going to be at one of the 2? In which case, does Barlaser drop out, or does Barlaser stay in and Hackney play further forward? If Hackney plays further forward, then you probably can't play Azaz and McGree. McGree is fully fit. Carrick was really at pains to say that. He's back. He's raring to go. He's absolutely fully fit. I think a fully fit Riley McGree gets into this Borough team, so I think McGree plays. So I think if he's going to go with Howson, Hackney, and Barlaser, then I think Azaz is probably the one who drops out. And I suspect it'll be Greenwood ahead of Coburn, simply because Carrick was again saying we're having to manage Josh very much on a day-to-day basis. Some days he feels great, some days he's definitely not so good. It doesn't feel like at the minute Coburn is likely to start. Latterlath's not ready. Isaiah Jones isn't ready. So I suspect we're probably looking at Greenwood through the middle again.
With Coburn, is there any indication that situation might change between now and the end of the season, or does it feel as though this is it set really until the summer?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of said, look, is part of the reason you're trying to manage this because you're trying to avoid an operation that would otherwise be inevitable. And Carrick kind of said, no, that's not really where we're at here. You know, it's not necessarily surgery. It's just that the procedure that he's had and the recovery from it is having to be very carefully managed, presumably to avoid against a really bad recurrence. And then you probably would need a more invasive bout of surgery. So it feels like at the minute this is where we're at with it, and fingers crossed it'll start to get better, but that doesn't feel like it's a guarantee. And obviously, you know, this has been going on quite a while now, hasn't it? I think 2 starts in all competitions since early November. I mean, you know, that's an awful lot of football that he's missed. You know, you would hope that in this 3-game week, Coburn could start one of those 3 matches, but I don't think that's nailed on.
And at risk of pointing out the absolute blatantly obvious here, Borough need to start winning. It feels like if they're going to get in the top 6, I think there's plenty of positives that Carrick can take from recent performances. But as he was at pains to point out after the Sunderland game, that they need to start coming away from games that they're thinking they should have won, having won, and this week looks not make or break, but if Borough are going to start making a run for things, it feels like this week and 3 games. Now, clearly one of those is at Leicester, which is the ultimate test. But these 2 games before then, Bristol City, Preston, 4 points minimum.
I think the fact they're being followed by Leicester away, yes, you probably feel that. Now, that's not to say that Borough can't go to Leicester and get something, but it is the hardest game in the Championship season, full stop. You know, there's no doubt about that. Leicester are going to run away with the league. So you'd want to be going into the back of that, I think, with 4 points from these 2 games. I mean, it's the inconsistencies that have not necessarily the inability to string together wins, isn't it? That has put Borough where they are, and is the real reason why they're not in the top 6 or, you know, a reasonable chunk closer to it. I'd have to double check the stats, but I think I'm right in saying that again, since November, I think we've only had back-to-back league wins once, which isn't really good enough, is it? And it's not going to allow you to make that leap that Borough have to make. And you know, I think, again, we talked about this on the previous vid, but I think there's 17 games left now. Well, it feels like at some stage within those 17 games, Borough are probably going to have to 4 wins in a row, or 10 points from 12, or that kind of a run. And obviously, the later you leave that, the more pressure that piles up, and the harder it then becomes to do that. So, I think between now and Easter, Borough are going to have to, at some stage, win 3 in a row, or take 9 from 12, or that kind of a run. And like you say, the fact that if you're going to do that in the next 4, that Leicester game is bang in the middle of it, does put a bit more pressure, certainly on the Bristol City and Plymouth home games. They feel like Borough can't afford to drop points in those matches.
And what's your feel for Saturday?
I think Borough will win. I mean, and Bristol City obviously had that cup game in midweek, didn't they? Which, you know, they pushed obviously a Premier League side all the way, but they did eventually go out. But their league form in the last 2 months is pretty poor. The change of manager from Pearson to Manning kind of worked for a while, but hasn't really worked. It feels like a big chance for Borough. I think with players coming back, I'd like to see McGree back in the side because I think Borough always or generally look a better side when a firing Riley McGree's in it. Greenwood up front worries me slightly because I thought that Wiley was enthusiastic and did some good things up against Sunderland. The only chance, well, he never looked like scoring apart from the one obvious opportunity when he went clean too early on, when I still didn't really think he looked like scoring either. So that would be my worry. But I think Borough will have enough to win the game. I'm going to go with my favourite cheeky couple of quid before. I'm going to go 3-1 Borough.
Big 3-1.
Big 3-1.
You've had a bit of luck with that this season.
I have had a bit of luck with that, right across all three North East teams, to be fair, yeah. For those who haven't seen previous vids, it's my every game that I cover, I have a couple of quid on 3-1 to either team. Whoever's playing, whichever North East team, whoever they're playing. And yeah, it's been a fair few 3-1s this season.
And what that means...
Or are you?
And what that means is every time I cover a game and it ends 3-1 and I haven't had a couple of quid on it, I'm left kicking myself.
Yeah.
I fancy Borough tomorrow. I fancy Borough. That Leicester game clearly looks a big ask. It's huge. As things stand at the minute, it's difficult to see Borough getting anything at Leicester. But I fancy Borough in the next two games. Preston are a funny team, aren't they? But they were as poor a team as I've seen at the Riverside so far this season. I fancy Borough to go there and get something. And I do think when you look at that, the front four there, even with clearly Crooks going and Rodgers gone and Jones out and Latte Lath out and Coburn not fully fit, it's still looking that there's still options there now, isn't it? To have Force back and playing well, to have McGree back, to Azaz. We haven't seen the best of Azaz yet, but Plymouth did in the first half of the season. And if Borough can get, if and when they get him playing like that, he's clearly going to be a key asset.
Last one on those games. We always say in the Championship, don't we, that it's really, really rare to come up against teams who really probably don't have an awful lot to play for. And I know we're so early in the season that you can't really say that about teams. But if you look at 4 of the next 5 games, Bristol City, Preston, Plymouth, Stoke, for me, they're 4 of the few teams in the Championship who already aren't going to go up and aren't going to go down.
And it's funny that because Bristol City are only 3 points behind Borough in the table. And Preston are above Borough in the table by a point, but it doesn't feel like
they're going to figure in it, does it?
Well, Preston had that brilliant start, didn't they? But it's been, there's been this, from the outside looking in, it's felt like there's been complaints from the fans about Ryan Lloyd, how popular he is there, and the form has been extremely, actually it hasn't been indifferent, it's been poor, hasn't it, for a long time. I know they've picked things up a bit recently, but I fancy Borough to win at Preston, and I think I fancy Borough to win on Saturday, but then it just feels like 6 points that is what that's what Borough haven't been capable. What Borough haven't been capable of doing. But then at some point they are gonna have to do it. I think Borough will win 2-0 on Saturday. Which really I should have a couple of quid on it now, shouldn't I? Given that you're gonna have a couple of quid on the
3-1. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you should. I'll also have a couple of quid on 3-1 Bristol City, mine, which be bigger odds.
Bristol City, Mallory Martin, the 1-0 there. That obviously springs to mind. That's the game and the goal, isn't it? That immediately springs to mind.
Yeah.
And Albert Adoma, whenever you think, did Albert Adoma score in a 1-0 Bristol City win at the Riverside when he was at Bristol City?
At Bristol City, yeah, that's kind of. But Borough actually have a fairly checkered record against Bristol City, don't they?
Do they?
Yeah. I'm saying, I should check now, but I'm fairly certain that's right.
Last season, they came from behind, didn't they? They were really poor in the first half, came from behind and drew 2-2 at the time when they were just.
This is where a team of professionals would have this straight to hand. We're messing about, and now I'm going to say, actually, I wasn't right. Right, so obviously, earlier this season, Borough lost at Bristol City. Last season, 2 draws. The season before that, Bristol City won down there, Borough won up here. The season before that, Bristol City won 3-1 at the Riverside. The season before that, Bristol City won 3-1 at the Riverside. The season before that, Bristol City won 1-0 at the Riverside.
Fire! It's not a checkered record. It's a dreadful record.
There you go. Yeah. It's a lot poorer than you think.
Is it too late to change my prediction for the thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you don't subscribe to the Northern Echo, where you'll get full access to all our Borough coverage, there's a special offer there on at the minute, which is a £5 for 5 months, and with that you'll get full access to everything we write about Borough. As I said at the start, do subscribe to the YouTube channel if you don't already, and rate and review if you listen to us on a podcast channel. Thanks very much for listening. Thanks very much for watching. Scott's there this weekend, so there'll be full coverage over the course of the weekend and analysis afterwards. And we'll be back next week, looking back on hopefully a rare Borough win over Bristol City with an episode of You Are My Borough. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Have a good weekend.